America entered World War II in 1941 after the attack on Pearl Harbor by Japan. However, up until that point, America was relatively uninvolved in the European wars. The German blitzkrieg was what first caught America's attention, utterly demolishing Poland as well as 6 other countries, which included Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, and France. The German blitzkrieg was attacked from the air with fighter pilots and from the ground using highly advanced tanks for their time. It also created psychological shock and disorganized their enemies. Although Germany defeated the French army at Dunkirk, it appeared as a victory after 700 British ships sailed to Dunkirk, rescuing 338,000 French troops and bringing them to England, calling it the Miracle of Dunkirk. Winston Churchill was taught a valuable lesson after Dunkirk, that being appeasement is futile.
They actually had an easy run through. Consequently, our army, 400,000 men, were trapped in Dunkirk. The problem was there was only a small jetty. They were able to get some of the men, but obviously being the large ships, they couldn't get into the beach. Operation Dynamo was, I think, one of the main epics of the war, and I think it was certainly a turning point.
It wasn't until the London Blitz when America decided to step forward. London was bombed for 57 nights, destroying buildings and killing hundreds. The United States still favored to be isolationists, however, because of the Great Depression currently happening in their economy. Ironically, it is when America started getting involved with the war between England and Germany that ceased the Depression. The U.S. initiated the Selective Services Act, Lend-Lease Act, and the Neutrality Act of 1939 after bearing witness to the horrors London was going through, shown by the perspective of Edward Murrow, a CBS reporter who lived in London during the time. The Neutrality Act of 1939 put all arms sold to England as cash and carry, which categorized it as a self-service basis. The Selective Service Act, also known as the Draft, was when American military generals picked random citizens over the age of 17 to fight in a war. However, because of the Lend-Lease Act, the U.S. wasn't officially a part of the war and justified their actions as a way to ensure their national security. Still, this created a strong alliance between Franklin Roosevelt and Churchill, creating many friendly interactions in the battles to come. Bombs were a key weapon in World War II. The 3 core types of bombers were saturation bombers, strategic bombers, and Tuskegee Airmen. The Tuskegee Airmen were not bombers themselves, but played a critical role in protecting the Allied bombers. They were made up of an African-American squadron whose sole purpose was to escort the Allies bombers through the enemy. When the time came, they did not lose a single bomber. Saturation bombers were the typical bombers for the Allies. Their goal was to inflict as much damage as possible over German cities. Strategic bombers were not as simple as saturation bombers. They were in charge of destroying key factories and military bases to stop Germany from producing any sort of war. They were usually sent out after a day of the saturation bombings.
I think he just come to office, hadn't he, Harris? And that was his first big raid. And you've got every bomber from OTU, conversion units, and anyway he could find a bomber, and that's how he made up his total. But the big bombing raid started, really, when the Pathfinders moved in. Because what we was doing then, we was bombing, not the target, we was bombing the flare. And if those flares were accurate...
The final 2 standing after the war were America and Japan. England and the Soviet Union were war-tarnished, and Germany and Italy had been defeated prior. The Pacific Ocean then became an arena for the two armies to wage war against one another. The Doolittle Raid was one of the first attacks after the Bataan Death March. It was an American surprise attack from the air, gaining another victory for the Allies. However, what is possibly more important is the boost of morale it gave the soldiers. After the Bataan Death March, the Allies were not in good shape, to say the least. The Bataan Death March was when American soldiers were prisoners of the Japan and walked through Bataan as they were brutally murdered.
But they called it a death march because of the way they died. If you stopped on the road, you were killed. If you had a malaria attack, they killed you. If you had to stop to defecate, they killed you. If you just couldn't take another step, they killed you. And how did they kill you? They'd either bayonet you to death, shoot you, or in some cases decapitate you.
Many of the prisoners were barely fed while walking in over 100 degrees weather. Malaria and dysentery were common among the prisoners, as well as starvation.
For 6 days, the men marched north with no food or water on what became known as the Bataan Death March.
10,000 American soldiers and 9,000 Filipinos were killed in the Bataan Death March. After the Doolittle Raid was the Battle of Coral Sea. It was a technical tie for both armies because they had to retreat, but it was seen as American victory since their goal was to stop Japan from reaching Mosby and Australia. The Battle of Midway was a massive turning point in the war. America was able to stop Japan's seemingly unstoppable advance. Japan forces were on the defensive for the rest of the war, which allowed military general Douglas MacArthur to recapture the rest of the Pacific with ease, and inevitably lead to the island hopping on November in 1943. Island hopping was when the United States captured a multitude of Japanese islands on their pathway to Japan. On these islands were Navajo talkers. They alerted other Japanese islands of U.S. incoming based on a language unique to them, so it was impossible for anyone to translate. America also had trouble dealing with Japanese kamikaze on their crusade. The point of the kamikaze was to deliberately crash into enemy planes. Over 30,000 Japanese kamikaze were killed over the length of these battles. The fiercest battle the Allies faced in their stand was in Iwo Jima. The fighting lasted for 36 days, creating 23,000 Marine casualties. After that, however, Iwo Jima was captured like all the other islands. This was one last battle of the island hopping campaign, and after that, we all know what ended the war.